a refugee, I never felt more stronger belonging to any other group at the United Nations than to this one. We don't share the same origin or the same language, but we are all bound by the same experience. My life of a war refugee started 24 years ago. I lived in Sarajevo, the city that was known by Olympic Games, and that was destroyed in the 90s in bombing. So the understanding of the war was very difficult at me at that time. I was in school. I didn't and couldn't cope with the entire situation. There were men on the borders of our city that were armed, and there were planes that were flying closer and closer to our buildings. So I felt like we were being put in a cage. On the 1st May in 1992, I left the city together with many other children and young mothers. We were escaping from the war. The voyage itself, it lasted only for a day, but to me it felt like an eternity. We were put in buses and we were stopped every 2 kilometers by the men in arms who were asking for money to let us pass. We were afraid. I was really afraid. But the boy sitting next to me, he was only 8, he started to crying. And I didn't know what else to do, but I pulled out the pack of cards and I tried to teach him how to play. It had an effect. We were both calmed with that kind of game. And we finally reached Croatia. Now you all know that country by some tourist magazine or some prospects, but I know it from the position of underage war refugee. For me, it's a bit different. Croatia is one of the countries that came to existence by the death of Yugoslavia, the country where we all lived before. And my first documents were given to me in that country. It was just a little piece of paper, a carton, with my photo on it that said war refugee. That was the only document I had for the next 6 years. The life of a refugee is a life of constant abuse. It was very difficult. We didn't have any rights, practically. We had just the basic medical insurance that wouldn't cover for anything. We had been constantly discriminated, stigmatized, and targeted as victims. I had a really large and loving family before the war, and we fell apart. Some of them were simply seduced by nationalistic ideals of a pure nation, and they didn't want us as a part of their family anymore. I come from something that was named a mixed marriage, and that was really absurd to me because I didn't understand what does it mean. But at that point, I was left outside. So the others were afraid of being targeted by nationalists themselves, and the third one didn't simply want to take the responsibility for any of us. I was left with a mass of those nameless children that came as war refugees in buses. We were all taken in the care of social service. And that's where my story begins. I remember that my friend had a toothache. I took her to the dentist. We were left outside. We weren't allowed to building. They didn't simply care because the only medical treatment that we were allowed was the one that is emergency. And emergency is not something that you decide. That is a decision that someone else has taken for you. The Bosnian and Croatian language are very much alike. They don't have any differences. The only difference was a little bit of accent. And that something was sufficient for us to be targets of constant abuse, of constant violence that police simply did not want to be involved in. Every time I tried to report any kind of violence against me and my classmates, they would tell me not to cause any further disturbance, or they would even threaten me with deportation. So we had to be quiet and we had to be alone. I never really told this story to anyone, and the only reason I'm telling you now is because I've seen it happening again. Now we are facing the refugee crisis, maybe the worst one since the Second World War. And I've heard all those stories that I can identify myself with in the stories of the people who are refugees now. They are coming from different parts of the world. We are not of the same origin. We do not share anything, actually, except for that experience. But they are sharing the same destiny, and they are on the same road as that I once had to take. So, why should we care about them? I mean, why should you care? A very long time ago, from the first tribes, we adopted a set of rules, a set of sort of behavior that allows us to prosper, to develop, to create a civilization, to become something more. And you know the rules, they're very basic, they're very the same. You can find them laced in every law, in every religion, in every community. That's like, don't kill, don't steal, help each other. They're very simple. What happens if we decide to leave refugees outside? They will not stop running, they will not stop coming, but they will become victims of smugglers, of war criminals, of war profiteers. You know, the worst kind of people, the people you have nothing in common, the ones that you don't wish to empower. They're the only ones who will take not only the money, not only the property, but also maybe the lives of the refugees. So, what can we do? Well, besides the obvious, like donations, money, clothes, old shoes, you can give them your time, you can actually approach them and see what is going on. You can spread the word about what is happening, about their suffering, and you can get to know them better. They're all over Europe. What I missed the most when I was a refugee, besides my family, was a voice. I wasn't allowed to say something, and I wasn't allowed to talk to anyone. And I missed someone who would speak up for me, who would tell about the difficulties I've been through, who would stood up and say, this is not wrong, this is not right, this is wrong. Why should we burden our children with a shameful and disgraceful behavior? Why should we wait for 20 or 50 years when we know that something is wrong right now? We should act at this moment, because saving refugees, that means saving not only our civilization, our morality, our future, but ourselves. We should act right now. Thank you.